welcome back to our chat. I think this is chat number 5, maybe. I am one of your hosts, Maia. We're also a host is Mikaela and Val, and today we're going to be talking to Amelia about her long journey through college and before, and she's going to tell us all about her amazing 3 majors and her study abroad experiences. Maybe if you want to, I don't know. It'll be pretty chill. We're just going to ask you about your experiences, what you think is important. But yeah, so why don't you give us some background on you, where you went to school, what you decided to major in, just basic info like that.
Yeah, totally. So my name is Amelia Smyth. I am currently an associate at Resilient Cities Catalyst, which is an urban nonprofit that looks to build resilience across 3 different scales, looking at the neighborhood, the region, but also at a project level. I ended up here through an odd route. I went to school at the City College of New York, which is a CUNY in Harlem, New York, where I decided to triple major, do not recommend, in international studies with a concentration in public policy, economics, and Jewish studies. And yeah, that's a high-level overview. Obviously, we can go more in depth as you guys see fit.
We've had a couple of very different scenarios as far as choosing a major. So Mikaela here knew she wanted to be a vet from very early on, had a whole path planned out and was very clear about it. But were you more clear on what you wanted to do or less, or just kind of figured it out as you went along, majored in something you were more interested in, or I don't know, what was your kind of thought process through that?
For sure. And I guess my path to my major goes back very far. So for context, I grew up on Long Island in New York. And most of the people around me went into business. It seemed like if you want to be successful, that's what you're going to do. So that's always the route that I kind of saw myself going down. Not because anyone forced it, but just because if you can't see other careers, it's hard to envision yourself there. But my junior year of high school, my sophomore year, maybe it was my sophomore year, I took a class called Facing History in Ourselves, which was all about genocide and looking back at history and our own inherent biases. And it was absolutely fascinating to me. When I was very, very young, in elementary school, I think it was 3rd grade, was handed Number the Stars by Lois Lowry, and that was my introduction to the Holocaust. I am not personally Jewish, but reading that book, I was just very confused, as any 8-year-old would be, as to how something like that could happen. And so it was something that remained an interest throughout middle school, throughout high school, but I stayed really focused on, I'm going to go into business because this is just an interest, right? Understanding human rights. But I knew that I wanted to do something international, right? I loved to travel. Learning about different cultures was really fascinating to me. So I thought that the only path for me was to do international business. Did I know what international business was? No, not really. But it just felt okay, well, I always assumed I was going to do business. I'm kind of interested in human rights and traveling and that kind of stuff. So let's just marry those 2 together. And I remember talking about it with one of my teachers in high school. She was not a guidance counselor. Ironically enough, she was my physics teacher at the time. And we just had we had double period AP physics, and in between classes, we were just chatting about what was interesting to us. And I started to tell her this story about my interest in human rights more generally. And I'll never forget, she said to me, Amelia, why are you going into international business if this is so interesting to you? And to be frank, I didn't have an answer for her, right? It was because I would like to be an independent woman in the future, and it seems like business is the route there, but it always lingered in my head. And so when I was applying to schools, I was really looking for a school that had an international business program, right? But in the back of my head, there were still these lingering thoughts about what does a career in human rights look like? And so I actually ended up choosing a school that did not have an international business major. But so when I was accepted to City College and was trying to figure out like, what school I wanted to go to, I reached out to who was my assigned advisor if I decided to choose City College. And I said, look, I visited your school. There's something about it that like, I don't know, it just feels right for me. But I really want to do international business and I don't see that major here. And I will never, my advisor, Susanna, who I'm actually very good friends with now, she wrote me a 3-page long email about how I could explore my interests in international business. And she basically said, look, you're going to major in international studies for the international bit, and you'll double major in economics. And then you will go into business, because at City College it's kind of like you enter through econ and then you can choose specific classes that would be, more business focused or like more policy focused. So that was it for me. I was like, great, this is what I'm doing. And I took my first 2 semesters of classes, and I was sitting in my econ class, funny enough, and I was fascinated by my macroeconomics, like not a common thing, right? But understanding how policy could so impact people's lives was fascinating to me. And at the same time, to be taking these international studies classes and seeing the ways in which, an existing economy can really impact just like folks' lives on the ground was really interesting. So then I decided international business is out the door. This is what I'm doing, international studies and economics. But along the way, I guess for context, my first semester was a little bit challenging, to say the least. I was trying to find my path, trying to find my people, and I had considered transferring. And my advisor, Susanna, the 3-page email person, said, Amelia, like, you've always talked about being really interested in the Holocaust. Why don't you just take an Intro to the Holocaust class? So you'll be taking classes that you'd really like while you try to figure out if you're going to transfer or not. So I signed up for this course, and through there I met Dr. Middleman, who is the chairperson of the department. And it was just an absolutely fascinating course. This man was and is like one of the people who has definitely changed the course of my life. And so he kind of roped me into multiple classes. And then my senior year, my second semester of my junior year, I had taken maybe 4 Jewish studies classes. And he pulled me aside and he said, I'd really like to bring you to Morocco, which, for context, for some reason, City College of New York Jewish Studies Department has a lot of money. And so they take kids to Morocco for free every semester. And he said, but you have to become a major, which means you also have to take Hebrew. And I was not going to pass up a free trip to Morocco for 8 days. So I became a Jewish studies major. And it was one of the best decisions I made. I met my closest friends through there. But that is the very long story of how I ended up with 3 majors.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
You know what is the most amazing about that? I'm wondering if, like, at 17, when you were a junior in high school, like, could you have at all fathomed that would have been the path that you took?
Absolutely not. And to be frank, when I was 21 deciding to declare a 3rd major, I didn't know it was possible. I was like, how can I get to Morocco? I can't declare a 3rd major. We had to call the bursar to figure out if it was actually possible. And they were like, yeah, sure. You want to do it? Go ahead.
That's amazing. Did you end up liking the Hebrew classes at all?
The Hebrew classes, I thought were going to be my least favorite classes ever. It was actually my favorite part of senior year.
Wow.
And I was devastated when it ended. Do you know what? The course was really hard, as I'm sure you could imagine, right? It's learning a new alphabet, learning how to make sounds that I had never made before, right? But the professor, who is another good friend of mine, Shani, was just and is absolutely incredible. I made really good friends in that class. So that's why Hebrew was really great.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. Do you have a question, Mikaela? Sorry.
I do. So when you were talking about your college decision, it sounded like you really weren't sure, and maybe this conversation with the counselor impacted you, but how did you end up deciding on your college choice, and what ultimately swayed you to it compared to other places?
So, to be frank, I don't think that I was sold on City College until my senior year of college, which just to be like super frank about it. In my high school, it was like very popular for the top 10 kids from their class to go to an Ivy or to go to a private school.
Sorry.
And
Roommates.
there felt like that there was a lot of shame about going to a public school, especially a CUNY. I think, especially on Long Island, going to a CUNY is seen almost as if like, well, that's where you go if like you have nowhere else to go. But I had applied to CUNY through the Macaulay Honors Program, which is a full tuition scholarship with all these additional benefits. So that's why I had initially applied. I didn't end up getting it. And instead I was selected for like the College Honors Program, which is different than Macaulay. It's a little bit confusing. But to go back, so, I just thought like, I have to apply to like the best of the best schools because like that's what's expected of me. I think I ended up applying to 17 schools.
17.
Yeah.
I remember that. I was
it was nuts.
That is nuts. Wow. I mean, you can hack it. That's wow.
But I think it was really because I didn't know what I wanted out of college, right? I thought, okay, it would be cool to study abroad. I'm not totally sure on my major. I don't know if I want to be close to home. I don't know if I want to be a city, right? So it was just like, let's just apply to everything. And honestly, it really came down to like the money, right? Like who gave me the most money? And City College gave me City College was going to be the least expensive because it's a public school. And then I also got a scholarship on top of it, right? I was kind of between Temple University in Philadelphia and City College of New York. Temple was going to be a lot more money, but we went to Temple and I toured it and I left thinking that that's where I was going to go. But the money question kept lingering in my head of if I'm not 100% sure of what I want to do, am I ready to go into debt over this? Which I have to say is like a really big decision for a 17-year-old to make. So, everyone makes their own decisions about that and everyone ends up okay, right? But then I had to go to City College because CUNY requires like a math test before you can even say if like you're going to go or not, which is kind of weird. So I went up to the campus with my dad on like a fall day. And if you've never seen or heard of City College, I would say just look up a picture. It is absolutely beautiful, especially in the fall. It looks like Hogwarts. It was built in like the 1800s and just has like, it's just like such a pretty campus in an unexpected way for New York City, right? And so I went there and I went home feeling really torn, right? Because I was battling what other people expected of me, which was to go to an Ivy or to go to a private school. And my own uncertainty about what I wanted to do, right? But also like this money question in my head. And ultimately, I was just like, you know what? City College is going to be it. But I think I waited until maybe 3 days before May 1st to make my decision because it feels like such a life-altering decision. And what I will say is I think for sure, the people that you're going to meet, the opportunities that you might get will differ depending on what school you go to for sure. But at the end of the day, right? If you are driven and ambitious, you will end up in a good place regardless of where you'll go. But yeah.
That's so interesting that you bring up the money question. I think you're the first person to kind of touch on that so far. And I guess So we had Catherine recently, who obviously went to very expensive private school. And what Catherine brought up that like she had a lot of opportunities that kind of came out of that, even despite like paying a lot. But you have kind of like flipped that on its head almost because of the fact that like you basically didn't have to pay anything. You were able to study abroad multiple times and like save all this money beforehand. So I feel like I don't know. What's your take on that as far as how that's worked out for you and like your opportunities?
I think what I'll say is that where you decide to go to school is not going to define you, right? In some ways, I've always seen where you choose to go to school almost as like a diving board, right? And so there are some schools that are just have like more opportunities accessible, right? Which are like a little bit higher, which makes like that eventual jump in this metaphor a little bit less of a jump, right? But I think I really benefited from being a big fish in a small pond, right? I wasn't afraid to go up to my advisor, well, obviously, as I've clearly laid out a couple of times, and just say like, what's out there? Like, this is what I know that I have to do. How do I get here? And really talking to professors and advisors and even knocking on the dean's, like the department dean's door my freshman year and just like getting to know folks. Proved to be life-changing because then when opportunities came across their desk, they were like, oh, we don't know a ton of people, but we do know that Amelia girl who talked a lot about like weirdly being interested in the Holocaust, which seems really weird, but like might be a good match for this, right? And it was those kind of things that like totally transformed my experience. And I think also being able to go to a school where, so my first 2.5 years, I like had to pay to go to school, right? Because like my scholarship wasn't a full scholarship. But the second that I declared a Jewish studies major, certain Jewish studies majors at City College get full tuition paid, which meant that Jewish studies was paying for my tuition, and every semester City College owed me my honor scholarship. So by the end of when I was in school, I was receiving checks to go to school. It was nuts. But it was stuff like that that allowed me to just like do crazy stuff. So after my freshman year, I really want an internship, but honestly, who gets an internship after their freshman year? I don't know. And I was like, okay, I don't really want to be at home over the summer. Also because I lived at home on and off throughout my college experience. And my dad had worked in Honduras in Latin America for 2 years with a nonprofit. But before doing that, he had gone to Guatemala to learn Spanish. And I had taken Spanish in high school and was interested in it. So I don't really know how this came to be, but I just decided to go to Antigua, Guatemala for the month of July. I was in like an international program. I met students from like across the globe. There were like 25 of us living in this tiny house. And I just like learned Spanish for a month. And it was a life-changing experience. And then CUNY has like the whole month of January off, which is like another opportunity to do something. So I decided I'd actually like to go back to Guatemala. So I went back. And obviously like these were not free programs. Also, these were not study abroad programs through my school. So what I will say is if you are like want to go study abroad, but your school does not have a robust study abroad program, don't let that define it. Because I studied abroad 3 times and I never went through a school program. Sure, it could be a little bit more expensive, but if you do your research, it can be pretty comparable. But you know, then I was able to go to Antigua a second time, which was fantastic. I also wanted to go a second time because when I was there the first time, this issue of indigenous rights in Guatemala came up, and I started talking to like Mayan people in the park of Antigua, Guatemala. And it was just absolutely fascinating to me. And I was like, I think I want to go back there. just so I could learn Spanish, but also learn more from these people, because I was seeing a lot of parallels between many genocides throughout history. And then also because ultimately school paid me to go to school, I got to go to Seville, Spain for the fall of my junior year, which was life-changing as well. It was just absolutely magical. I took 4 classes, all of the credits came back, so it was as if I was still at my home campus, even though it was not a CUNY-based program. But yeah, I think you have to be willing to go and look for opportunities, but if you are, where you go to school will not define you. Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. I'll stop there.
I love I love so much, well, everything you talked about, but so our whole point in doing this is because I think there's a need for kids, especially high school kids, who just have no clue. The whole college thing, it's like a big mystery. They don't know where they're going. So to hear the experience of someone who got through it and got through it like in amazing ways and in ways that you never even imagined, I think is so valuable for kids. You mentioned that freshman year was challenging. What made freshman year challenging for you?
A couple things. First, I had never even been to summer camp. Just because like I was lucky enough to have like a stay-at-home mom, so like summers like was at home, right? I grew up in a town where most of my cousins lived, right? Like there was always people to hang out with, and so all of a sudden to go to a school, especially in a city as big as New York, I think the New York City college experience is very unique, because the school is in New York City. Often the school itself won't have like a lot of activities happening like on the weekends or weekdays. And many of them are commuter schools. So it got really lonely a lot. And so my first semester I dormed on campus, and I was in a suite with like 4 individual bedrooms. But for some reason I was placed with 2 sophomores and a senior. Right, so these are people who had like already made their friends. And it was just like very challenging, you know, to come from an environment where like you live in a small town, you know everybody, to all of a sudden be like thrown in this new environment where not only do you not know anyone, there's few opportunities to meet those people. I ultimately made really good friends through classes and clubs. And that's the same advice that I've given to my siblings, even as they've gone to colleges that are like more so the traditional experience. But yeah, that made it particularly challenging.
So you stayed in a dorm. So then did you continue to dorm, or is dorm a verb?
So after that semester, when I was trying to figure out if I wanted to like stay at City College or transfer, I needed to know if I just didn't like City College because I felt lonely, right? So moving home while staying at school for the second semester, my freshman year, felt like the easiest way to figure that out, right? But it was like a really hard decision to make because again, there was like an expectation of like what kind of person stays at home for school, which I think is totally unfair. You know, like, yes, I stayed home for school, but I also had incredible experiences outside of my hometown and outside of the city. My parents used to joke that I was never home because I was basically on campus from 7:30 in the morning until 6 at night, right? And then an hour and a half commute each way. It was, you know, I wasn't home a lot. But being at home gave me some comforts and made me realize that it was really the loneliness that made me like really despise school. That then, you know, once I was ready to step out on my own terms, going to Antigua, going to Seville, ultimately interning in Washington, D.C., it felt like decisions that I was making on my own without the expectation of other people weighing on me. And that was really liberating. So, you know, I think you just have to make the best choice for you. And I know it's hard when you're in high school and there's all these expectations laid out of you. but you're the only person that spends your whole life with you. So do what that person wants to do.
Oh, that is such good advice because I really do feel like a lot of people are under that kind of pressure. Um, Yeah, so I mean, even like choosing to go to community college for 2 years, like that's a huge like stigma, even though it might be like a really good choice for some people, or choosing to go to a school that's like not as prestigious, even though it has your programs that you want to do. It can be very challenging as a high schooler, and as you're trying to like prove to people that this is how, prestigious you are and like what your worth means. So yeah, I think that's amazing advice to just really free yourself of others' expectations, and just do what really feels right for you. Spend some time considering what is very valuable to you and, what is going to make you happiest instead of, yeah, getting that feed from everybody else. I've totally been there. So thank you.
It's hard to do.
I think everyone has, right?
Yeah.
Human.
For sure, for sure. Oh. In our last couple of minutes, we've been asking basically the same question of all of our interviewees, and that is, what advice would you give yourself now that you're almost 2 years out of college?
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's wild. To your 17-year-old self, or just like the self you were when you were a senior in high school, trying to decide where to go, what you were going to do, your whole life ahead of you, jumping off that cliff. What advice would you give to that version of you?
Well, I think first, not to repeat myself, but I mean, it does apply in this situation. I really wish that I could tell my 17-year-old self, like, shut out the noise from everyone else, and just like figure out what you want to do, which is very, very challenging, right? Like, I am not saying that is an easy thing to do, but if you have that as your North Star as you are making these decisions throughout your 4 years, not just when you're a senior in high school, I think that is super helpful. I would also say get comfortable outside of your comfort zone. So one of the opportunities that I had while I was at City College was to become a fellow through the Jeanette K. Watson Fellowship, which is through the Watson Foundation. It is an incredible program. They select 15 students from across the CUNY system and a couple other city universities to participate in this 3-year program that provides 3 years of fully funded internships, which is actually how I landed my job today. But the first year, there are a lot of seminars, right? Like to prepare you for like the crazy stuff that's going to happen over the course of these 3 years with the fellowship. And I will never forget one of my fellow fellows, Jacob, saying, I want to get to the point where I am uncomfortable in my comfort zone. And I feel most comfortable beyond it, right? Because I think we all know that like growth is happening outside of your comfort zone. And so although it's going to feel uncomfortable and painful, and sometimes frustrating sometimes to be outside of your comfort zone, that's where you're growing, and that should bring you the most comfort. And I think that applies to your first semester dorming at school, to being dropped in a developing country and trying to figure out what you're going to do, to even, I think that's something that still applies to me today, like even in my work life, right? When someone throws me something that I have no idea how to do, but they some reason think that I do. So I think that's really important. And yeah, that last piece being where you go to college does not define you. I will say I am like one of the proudest alumni from the City College of New York. I am the first to shut down my colleagues when they think, oh, CUNY is like whatever. I actually got a pendant that says CUNY City College, and it hangs in the background of all my work calls because I want to remind them that one of their colleagues who is the most stretched for time is the colleague that went to CUNY City College. Yeah, I think those are like the 3 things that if my 17-year-old self heard my 23-year-old self saying, it would just be super helpful.
Yeah. Oh, that like huge, just taking pride in your choice and really just accepting yourself and your path is so important. Oh, that's awesome. Do you guys have any more questions? I think we're coming up on 30 minutes.
Oh, of course, I have a ton of questions, but I loved how you. There were two things that, and it's funny because our guest last week goes to Temple, and you and he both said the same thing about you described taking a class where a teacher just really piqued your interest in something that you never expected. So I love your advice to be like, just try new things, get out, like push yourself to knock on that professor's door and, you know, introduce yourself. And
yeah, I mean, that was just like so critically important for me. I think not just in high school, that course that I took that was like about the facing history in ourselves was actually only for juniors and seniors. But my freshman year, I heard about it and asked my social studies teacher, who was the head of the department, if I could take it. So she put in an exemption so that way I could take it a year early, right? So like that was like total life course change right there. But then just like, yeah, knocking on department dean's doors. Not a lot of people do it. And if you're just really nice about it, it can pay dividends. Yeah.
Amelia, Mikaela is, so my mother is famous for saying, you don't ask, you don't get. Mikaela is the epitome of that. Mikaela has no problem asking for things. She'll ask for it 10 times if she has to. And that's why she is as successful as she is. And I think the three of you all exhibit that. And I think there's like a fearlessness in that I just really admire. And I think it's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, you know, spending your whole life just with yourself does not just mean like tuning out all the noise. It also means like being your number one advocate, because like if you're not going to do it, who else is? So yeah, just to kind of circling back to that point, and felt like totally, yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah, Val, mom always told me the worst anyone can say is no. So it's not that it's not scary. It's just that if you want it, you're going to keep trying and keep getting no's and ask the right person, and it's going to work out.
That is some very incredible basic life advice that a lot of us miss.
And I'm sure really great advice for people listening who are juniors and seniors in high school and or even freshmen in college, like just trying, or, you know, for everyone. Obviously, I'm taking a lot of great advice from this too. Thank you guys.
Me too.
But particularly for people feeling especially lost in their journey, or just, you know, anxious, frightened. Yeah. So helpful. Thank you so much, Amelia.
Yes, thank you. This was amazing.
Thank you, Amelia.